Cassidy and Hammy and Crystal, the Board Game Blitzers, showing your favorite games.
Hi there, this is Crystal from Board Game Blitz, and this is my Top 100 Board Games video series. This is the first time I've ever made a Top 100 list, let alone produced it in video form, so this was a really fun thing for me to do, and hopefully you watched the intro video that Ambi and I made together, but even if you didn't, this should be pretty exciting, and just as a heads up, my dogs make appearances in a lot of the videos because, well, they can't let me do anything by myself, apparently. And yeah, so let's get on with the list. My number 100 is Imperial Assault. While most of you might know that I'm a Trekkie, I do love Star Wars too, and Imperial Assault does a really good job of taking the Star Wars universe and putting it into a playable board game. I used to play the first edition version of the board game Descent, and when I heard that Imperial Assault was coming out, which is basically kind of the same system as Descent, but streamlined and a little better, I got really excited. I played through the entire first campaign of Imperial Assault with some friends and had a great time with it. I haven't played all of the expansion stuff, but at some point I'd really like to. So that's my number 100, Imperial Assault. My number 99 is a little bit of a cheat because it's technically two different games, but they're so similar that I've grouped them together, and that's Rolling America and Rolling Japan. These roll and write games have players drawing different colored dice out of a bag and then writing down the numbers that get rolled onto their player sheet in different corresponding locations. The sheets look like kind of abstracted versions of either the United States or Japan with different blocks and squares all over it. And when you write a number down, the rule is you can't write a number next to another number unless it's the same number or one above or one below. So at certain points, dice are going to get rolled that you won't be able to place anywhere legally, and then you have to write an X on your score sheet. Once everybody's gone through a certain number of turns, the player with the least amount of X's on their score sheet wins the game. It's really simple, like a lot of roll and write games, but there's some interesting strategy, and no two sheets ever end up looking exactly the same. So that's why I love it so much. That's my number 99, Rolling America and Rolling Japan. When I started making this list, I was actually a little surprised when this one showed up in my top 100, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. So my number 98 is Red Dragon Inn. It's ridiculous. It's silly. You're managing your character's health and inebriation levels throughout the course of the game. There are tons of different characters throughout all of the different expansions for this game, and players, it's very take that. You're giving drinks to other players and causing damage and doing silly stuff, and it's honestly, I can't even describe it well. It's been a little while since I've played it, but every time this game hits the table, it causes a lot of fun and a lot of laughter. And honestly, I think that's one of my favorite things about any board game is having a good time. I definitely do not recommend having real beverages along with your character because that can be dangerous. Luckily, I've never done that, but I've heard some stories. So if you want a good time and some silly fun and tons of expansion content, you should check out my number 98, which is Red Dragon Inn. My number 97 is Looney Quest. So in Looney Quest, it is a game where players are given a transparency sheet and you have to use a dry erase marker to draw on that sheet during each round of the game to accomplish different goals. So the game board in the middle will have specific things on it, like enemies you need to defeat or items that you need to capture. And what players do is they simultaneously draw on each of their transparencies, trying to accomplish the goals for that specific round. So you might be trying to connect two items together with a line without running into some obstacles or circling some objects that are on the board. But the thing is, you're doing it on your transparency, and then you're going to place the transparency onto the thing in the middle after the fact to see if you've accomplished it or not. So spatial awareness is really important in this, and I tend to be kind of good at that, so maybe that's why I like this game so much. But honestly, it's just really fun because you'll look at your transparency and you're like, oh yeah, I nailed it, I totally got everything where I should, and then you put it on top of the thing and all of a sudden no, that circle's not even in the right place, and that line's going in the opposite direction you thought it was, and it's really, really silly. There's actually a kid's version of this that's a little simpler, that's called Doodle Quest. I've never played that one, but Looney Quest, while it's friendly enough for kids, it's actually really fun for adults too. And so that is why it is my number 97, Looney Quest. Wait, Sterling, what do you mean you're the Duke? Lana just said she was the Duke, and I'm the Duke, so you can't be the Duke. My number 96 is Coup, where everybody always claims to be the Duke. So in Coup, players each have cards in front of them face down with specific rolls on them, and on your turn you get to claim the ability of one role that's in the game. But you don't have to claim the ability of a role that's on a card in front of you. If a player thinks you're lying, they can call you out, and if they're right, you lose a card. If they're wrong, they lose a card. The different characters all do different things, and you're basically just trying to eliminate the other players by getting rid of both cards in front of everybody else except for you. The Duke allows you to collect tax, which gives you money, which is valuable for doing other things in the game, so that's why everybody tends to claim it. I don't believe him, I don't think he's the Duke, but that is my number 96, Coup. My number 95 is Seasons. I actually didn't have a lot of interest in playing this game for the longest time, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but I think it has something to do with the fact that when people in my game group would play it near me, I got very confused thinking that they were trying to get my attention all the time because they kept saying the word crystal. There's a lot of crystals in this game, so needless to say, I finally played it and really enjoyed it. So in Seasons, players draft cards, roll dice, and collect resources and other cards, trying to build up an engine. I think the theme is they're actually wizards trying to compete in a tournament that lasts over the course of different seasons. Each season of the game has different dice associated with it and other things, so things change up throughout the course of the game in interesting ways, and the players who draft well are almost always going to do better. So this game isn't super beginner friendly, only because an experienced player is definitely going to do better than a new player. But once you know some of the strategies and some of the cards in the game, it's really interesting and it's a lot of fun, even if when people are playing it near me, I think they're talking to me all the time. So that is my number 95, Seasons. For my number 94, I'm already kind of cheating again. Well, who knows? This is what's happening. So my number 94 is Flick 'em Up and Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter. So of these two games, Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter is actually my favorite, but I've only played it a couple of times, whereas I've played Flick 'em Up more, so I'm more familiar with it. And really, the mechanisms in both games are similar, so putting them at different entries in my list would have been weird, and I just didn't want to. So in both games, players are taking on the role of characters who are trying to complete specific scenario-based objectives. And those scenarios are either set in the Wild West in Flick 'em Up or in a town overrun by zombies in Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter. And so you're flicking discs and you're flicking weapons and other things around to either shoot the bad guys or kill the zombies and so on and so forth. The scenarios are pretty varied in what your objectives are. Sometimes it's just kill all the bad guys. Sometimes there's specific things that you're trying to do. You can flick your discs into and out of buildings, and by hitting specific objects you can do things with them. It's really neat, and Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter has a zombie tower that is the coolest little component in a game, where every time the zombies do a specific thing, they get placed on top of the tower, and then at a specific point you can cause a zombie rush where the tower gets released and all the zombies come sliding out of it toward you, and whether they hit you or not determines whether you get hit, and it's really cool and interesting and fun to watch on the table. So I love both games, but Dead of Winter, it's weird, I don't like zombie themed games, but for some reason in this specific setup, I like the zombie better than the Wild West, so that's my number 94, Flick 'em Up and Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter. My number 93 is the first two-player game on my list, and that is Mr. Jack. So in Mr. Jack, there are 8 characters on the board that can be controlled by either player. One player is trying to keep the identity of Jack the Ripper hidden, and the other player is trying to find out which character is Jack the Ripper. Players use cards to manipulate the different characters on the board, trying to move them into and out of the light that is on the board, because players or characters who are visible in the light at the end of each round against players who aren't visible will help the player who's searching for Jack try and narrow the search down, as it were, because whether Jack is visible or not that information will be given to them. This game's really interesting, and I haven't played the newer version, Mr. Jack in New York, but I've heard good things about that, and I'd like to try it at some point as well. So that is my number 93, Mr. Jack. I'll admit, my next game is picked a little bit on nostalgia, but also on some interesting gameplay. So my number 92 is Vegas Showdown. So of all the games that are Las Vegas themed, this is one that doesn't get much buzz nowadays. I think the more popular Las Vegas gets talked about more often, and I've never played that game, so I can't really compare the two. But in Vegas Showdown, players are bidding on different pieces of a casino, so slots, table games, lounges, restaurants, etc., and putting them onto their player board, trying to build up the best casino they can. The bidding mechanism is pretty interesting in this, although I will admit the components of the game have been lauded for being not good. Paper mats and other stuff like that. So this was one of the first modern hobby board games that I learned when I got into the hobby back in 2007, and I think the game still holds up pretty well today. And honestly, I mean, come on, even though I learned it when I was living in the Midwest, now that I live in Las Vegas, I think it's required that I have at least one Las Vegas game on my list. So that is my number 92, Vegas Showdown. My number 91 is Mintworks, a very tiny worker placement game. In fact, it comes in a tin the size of an Altoids tin, and the little workers that you'll be placing during the game kind of look like little breath mints. But you don't want to eat them because they don't taste good, do they? No, they don't. So in Mintworks, players use their mints or their workers to get more workers and to buy and build plan cards trying to get victory points. When somebody gets 7 victory points, that triggers the end of the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll win. It's really quick to play, and it distills worker placement down into a very, very simple way. So if you wanted to teach somebody a worker placement game kind of as a gateway or an intro to other worker placement games, this one's great. And honestly, it fits in your pocket, so you could take it anywhere. I really like it, even though the mints aren't edible, although I suppose you could buy some Altoids and play those. But then, if you ate your pieces, then you wouldn't have any more workers. So that is my number 91, Mintworks.